40 years ago, your dad walked into a stereo shop in suburban New Jersey, signed a credit slip for $1,200, and walked out with a cassette deck. 40 years later, that same cassette deck, scratched, yellowed, sitting in a basement, is selling on the second-hand market for 4 times what he paid for it. The 1980s were the golden age of consumer audio. The best engineers from Japan, America, and Britain were all building gear at the same time, all of them in their absolute prime. And almost none of them knew that the entire industry was about to collapse into digital streaming and Bluetooth speakers shaped like rocks. These are the 30 pieces of 1980s hi-fi that audio collectors are chasing right now, and the prices will surprise you. The journey starts in the cassette deck wars. Number 1. The Nakamichi Dragon. Released in 1982, the Dragon was the first cassette deck in history with automatic azimuth correction, a feature that meant you could play any tape made on any deck and the Dragon would correct its own head angle in real time. Original price, around $1,800. Today, a clean Dragon in working condition sells for between $3,000 and $5,000 at vintage hi-fi shops in Tokyo and Brooklyn. The Dragon is the single most famous cassette deck ever produced and remains the dream piece for vintage tape enthusiasts worldwide. Number 2. The Nakamichi 1000 ZXL. The flagship that came right before the Dragon, hand-built in limited numbers, with a brushed silver face and 3 motors driving the transport. The ZXL Limited Gold Edition is the absolute pinnacle of vintage cassette decks, and a clean ZXL Limited in original packaging recently sold at auction in Japan for over $20,000. Number 3. The Pioneer CT01. Pioneer's answer to Nakamichi, a 3-head reference deck with a closed-loop dual capstan transport. Quieter than a Dragon, almost as accurate, and now selling for around $1,800 on the used market. The CT-A1 was Pioneer's most ambitious cassette deck ever, and only a few thousand units were produced before Pioneer pivoted towards CD development. Then came the portable revolution. Number 4. The Sony Walkman WMD6C Professional. Released in 1984, this is the cassette recorder that radio journalists and audio archivists carried for decades. Servo-controlled motor, Dolby B&C, line-level outputs. The WMD6C is the most beloved portable cassette deck ever made, and clean working examples now sell for around $1,500 on the vintage market. The deck was in continuous production until 2002, which has made parts and service relatively available, and a well-serviced WMD6C is now the gold standard for portable tape recording. Number 5. The Sony TC-D5 Pro 2. The professional field recorder used by every NPR reporter in the 80s. Built like a tank, with manual record levels and balanced inputs. Today, these are selling for around $2,000 to a small cult of analog field recording enthusiasts who refuse to use anything digital. The TC-D5 was the field recorder behind countless documentaries, oral histories, and ethnographic recordings from the era. Move now to the reel-to-reel decks that built the legend of high fidelity. Number 6. The TEAC X2000R. Auto reverse, 2-track, 10.5-inch reels, and a meter bridge that looks like the cockpit of a Boeing 747. The X2000 was sold to home audiophiles in the early 80s and is now the most photographed reel-to-reel deck on the entire vintage audio internet. Working examples now sell for around $3,000, and museum-quality restored versions can pull twice that. Number 7. The Akai GX747. Akai's glass and crystal head technology made these decks immortal. The GX heads simply do not wear out the way other heads do, which means a 747 you find in a garage today often still records as well as the day it left the factory. Going price today? around $1,500, and the auto-reverse 747 dBx version with full noise reduction can climb higher. Number 8. The Revox B77, the professional reel deck from Switzerland that lived in radio stations across Europe. 3-speed, with the indestructible Swiss build quality. The B77 is now the most common and pro-grade reel deck on the used market and sells for around $2,000 in working condition. Studio 1/6 track versions and the high-speed mastering variants sell for significantly more. Number 9. The Studer A810, the professional master tape recorder from the same Swiss company that built the B77, but built for actual recording studios. A working A810 with all original capstans and heads now sells for between $5,000 and $8,000 to vintage recording studios trying to recapture the analog sound. The Studer A810 was the recording deck behind countless 80s albums and is the reason analog mastering still sounds the way it does. Now we move into amplification, where the story gets expensive fast. Number 10. The Krell KSA-50. Released in 1980, the KSA-50 was the first product from a small Connecticut company called Krell, and it changed American hi-fi forever. Pure Class A operation, 50 watts that drove almost any speaker on the market, and a heat output that could warm a small bedroom. Clean original KSA-50s now sell for around $3,000 and have a waiting list among vintage Krell enthusiasts. Dan D'Agostino, the founder of Krell, would go on to build entire empires of American high-end amplification, and the KSA-50 is where the whole story started. Number 11. The Threshold S500, the first product from Nelson Pass, the engineer who would go on to build half the high-end amplifier industry. The S500 had an output stage so over-engineered that some examples are still running on their original parts 40 years later. Going price today, between $2,000 and $4,000, with the rarer stasis circuit variants pulling premium prices. Number 12. The Mark Levinson ML2, monoblock amplifiers from Connecticut, with 25 watts of pure Class A power per channel. The ML2 is the amplifier that defined high-end American audio in the early 80s, and a working pair now sells for around $6,000. The amplifier was so hot in operation that owners often built dedicated cooling racks for them, and a fully serviced pair with original Levinson Cardus wiring is one of the most coveted vintage amplifier setups in existence. If you are enjoying this list, hit subscribe. We cover the gear, the brands, and the culture of the 80s every week. Now let us get to the preamps and the speakers that completed these systems. Number 13. The Audio Research SP10, the tube preamp from Minneapolis that audiophiles still consider the reference for analog playback. The SP10 has 612AX7 tubes glowing through its faceplate, and it now sells for around $4,000 on the secondhand market. Audio Research has been continuously serviced since the company was founded, which means even 40-year-old SP10s can be brought back to factory specification at the Minneapolis factory. Number 14. The Conrad Johnson Premier 1, the flagship tube amplifier from the company in Fairfax, Virginia, that made tube amplification respectable again in the 1980s. The Premier 1 had 200 watts per channel from 12 KT 88 power tubes, and a clean pair now sells for around $8,000. The Premier 1 is the amplifier responsible for thousands of audiophiles abandoning solid state and going back to tubes in the late 80s. Number 15. The Mark Levinson number 26 Preamp, the reference solid-state preamp of the late 80s, with separate power supply, balanced outputs, and a remote control that felt like it was machined from a single block of aluminum. Today these sell for around $3,000, and the rarer number 26S variant with even higher specification can sell for double that. Now the speakers. Number 16. The Quad ESL63. The British electrostatic speaker from Huntingdon, England, with a delay line that made the entire panel behave like a single-point source. Audiophiles still consider the ESL63 one of the most accurate loudspeakers ever made, and a clean working pair now sells for around $3,000. The original ESL63s have a known weakness in the EHT power supply boards, but rebuilt and serviced pairs from specialist UK restorers are considered the best-sounding electrostatics ever produced. Number 17. The Yamaha NS1000M. The Japanese studio monitor with a beryllium mid-range dome, originally sold to recording studios in Tokyo and Los Angeles. The NS1000M is the most desirable Japanese speaker of the entire 80s, and a clean pair with original cabinets now sells for around $3,500. The speaker was banned from American production at one point due to beryllium toxicity concerns, which has only increased its rarity and value. Number 18. The KEF 105.3. The British floor standing speaker with separate cabinets for the woofer and the mid-range, in a tower design that looked like nothing else on the market. Clean KEF 105.3s now sell for around $2,000, and the Reference 107 from the same era can pull even higher prices. Number 19. The JBL L100. The American studio monitor with the orange foam grille that became a 60s and 70s icon and continued production into the early 80s. Clean original L100s now sell for around $1,500 and have become the single most photographed speaker on Instagram audio accounts. JBL recently reissued the L100 Classic, which proves how strong the brand recognition for this speaker still is. Number 20. The Klipsch Heresy. The compact horn-loaded speaker from Hope, Arkansas, designed by Paul Klipsch himself. The Heresy was in production through the entire decade and is now the most owned vintage Klipsch in America, with clean pairs selling for around $1,200. The Klipsch Cornwall Forte and the giant Klipschorn from the same family are even more sought after, with original mid-80s Klipschorns in walnut now selling for over $5,000 per pair. Now we move to the turntables, where the story turns British and German. Number 21. The Lynn Sondek LP12. The Scottish belt drive turntable that started production in 1973 and continues today, but the 80s versions with the original bearing and Valhalla power supply are the most coveted. Today, a clean 80s LP12 sells for between $2,000 and $3,000, and a fully upgraded LP12 with ITOC arm and ASOC cartridge can sell for considerably more. The LP12 is the single most upgradable turntable ever made, with a continuous product life cycle that means parts from a 1983 deck still fit a brand new one today. Number 22. The Thorens TD160 Super. The Swiss-German belt drive turntable that sat under almost every serious audiophile system in 80s Europe. Clean working TD160 Supers now sell for around $800, and the rarer TD147 with the SME tone arm goes for considerably more. Number 23. The Technics SL1200 MK2. The direct drive turntable from Osaka, Japan, that became the standard for radio stations, hi-fi enthusiasts, and DJs worldwide. The Technics is still in production today, but the original 80s MK2 examples now sell for around $1,200 in clean condition. The SL1200 is the most produced audiophile turntable in history, and the brand is the foundational platform for the entire vinyl DJ industry that emerged in the 80s. Number 24. The Denon DP100M. The flagship Denon turntable, an enormous direct drive machine with a tone arm so heavy you needed both hands to operate it. Clean DP100Ms now sell for around $8,000 when they come up at all. And finding one with the original platter and tone arm board is the dream of every Japanese hi-fi collector. Number 25. The Bang & Olufsen Beogram 8002. The Danish tangential tracking turntable with the moving tone arm that slid across the record on a rail. A perfect Beogram 8002 with original MMC cartridge now sells for around $1,200, and the design language of the Beogram has become as collectible as the audio performance. Bang & Olufsen turntables are now bought as much for industrial design pieces as for actual listening. The final 5 take us back to American and Japanese amplification. Number 26. The Carver Cube. The small black amplifier from Bob Carver's company in Linwood, Washington, that produced 200 watts per channel from a chassis the size of a paperback book. The Cube was the most efficient amplifier of the entire decade, and now sells for around $700. Bob Carver pioneered the magnetic field amplifier topology that made the Cube possible, and the technology is still studied in audio engineering programs to date. Number 27. The Adcom GFA 555. The 200 watts per channel power amp from New Jersey became the standard recommendation for cost-conscious audiophiles in the late 80s. Clean GFA 555s now sell for around $600, and the slightly later Mark II version with the upgraded power supply pulls a small premium. The Adcom was designed by Nelson Pass on contract before he started Pass Labs, which gives the amplifier serious audiophile pedigree despite its mid-range price. Number 28. The Sansui AU-X11. The Japanese integrated amplifier that was Sansui's flagship in the mid-80s, with a chrome face and a build quality that has aged better than almost any other Japanese amp of the decade. AU-X11s now sell for around $2,000, and the slightly rare AU-D11 with the X-balanced circuit can sell for even more. Sansui produced relatively few flagship amplifiers compared to Pioneer and Yamaha, which has kept demand high in the vintage market. Number 29. The Pioneer SX80, the Japanese receiver that arrived right at the start of the decade and represented the absolute end of the receiver wars. With 90 watts per channel and an LED tuning meter, the SX80 now sells for around $1,200. The receiver was a transitional product between the silver-faced monsters of the 70s and the smaller, sleeker components of the CD era. Number 30. The Macintosh MC2500, the American power amplifier from Binghamton, New York, with the blue meters and the autoformer output that made Macintosh the symbol of American hi-fi forever. Clean MC2500 units now sell for around $4,000, and the Macintosh service network in upstate New York will still service these amplifiers today using mostly original parts. Macintosh is the only American audio brand from the 80s still producing nearly identical product lines, which means a vintage Macintosh purchase is also an investment in continued factory support. So why do these prices keep climbing? Because the 1980s were the last decade when audio gear was built to last forever. The chassis were thicker, the transformers were larger, the parts were overspecified, and the engineers actually cared. Almost none of this gear was disposable. The same Krell KSA 50 that sold for $3,000 in 1980 is still running today on the same parts in someone's listening room, sounding exactly as good as the day it left the Connecticut factory. The vintage audio market has woken up to this. The Tokyo collectors have woken up to this, and the prices, which were depressed for 2 decades, are now climbing every year. If you are thinking about buying any of these pieces, here is what to look for. Original packaging and manuals can double the value of any vintage component. Service history matters enormously, especially for cassette decks with their belts and capstans. and for turntables with their bearings and suspensions. Modifications generally hurt resale value, even when the modifications themselves are technically improvements. Original cosmetic condition outranks almost everything else, and a flawless amplifier with average sound is usually worth more than a serviced amplifier with cosmetic flaws. The vintage audio hobby has matured into a serious collector market with grading conventions, regional auction houses, and a global community of restorers willing to pay top dollar for original condition pieces. So tell us in the comments, which one of these 30 pieces would you most want to own today? If you enjoyed this trip through the golden age of audio, hit subscribe and ring the bell. We are working through every iconic piece of 1980s culture, one video at a time. And if you have a Nakamichi Dragon in your garage right now, do yourself a favor and look up what it is worth before you sell it for $50 at an estate sale.